First of all, I just want to thank everyone for being here today, sitting inside on such a beautiful day, being sedentary, slowly killing ourselves, and listening to these amazing presentations and sharing these great ideas with us. And I want to talk about an idea that I became very passionate about just a few short months ago. But let me backtrack a little bit. A few years ago, I was working at Stevens College here in town in the cafeteria. It must have been around graduation, or maybe it was parents' weekend. Whatever the reason, there were more than just students in the building that day. A woman, maybe 40 years of age, approached me and made this hand gesture to me. I looked at her hands, then probably gave her a look like she was crazy, so she changed her hand gestures to do this. At this point, it became obvious to me that she was deaf. I froze. I didn't know what to do. I had never interacted with a deaf person before. Thankfully, her daughter, who was maybe 12 years old, was standing right next to her. She looked up at her mom, asked her what she wanted, almost a little annoyed, and then told me she was looking for coffee. The problem with this story is that I know the American Sign Language alphabet. I learned it when I was very young, and because children have this incredible capacity to pick up language, I always remembered it. But that was the last thing I was thinking about when this woman was asking me for coffee. Truthfully, I was trying to figure out how to get her to go away because she made me uncomfortable. I didn't realize it that day, but the situation would change my life forever. It was around this time that I noticed an ad for an 8-week ASL community course being advertised in the MU Info, a weekly ad sheet put out by the University of Missouri. I thought to myself, maybe I should confront these feelings I had towards this deaf woman and learn a little bit of sign language. Instead, I wrote myself off as being too busy, maybe next semester. I watched this ad go in and out of the MU Info every single semester, sometimes even twice a semester, but still, I put it off. It wasn't until 8 months after I graduated from the University of Missouri that I decided I had time to devote to ASL. This was 2 years after the interaction that I had with this deaf woman in my story. When I started to take the class, it actually turned out to be a lot of fun. My teacher was an adult who was deafened later in life and was able to regain the use of her speech. Because of this, the class was taught in English. There was only one class meeting a week, no homework, friendly introduction to the language. We learned the basics similar to any other beginning course in a foreign language, but something happened that I didn't expect. I ended up taking away much more from this course than just an understanding of grammar and vocabulary. And this is what I'd like to share with you today. The first thing I noticed is that I became very aware of my ears. I began to appreciate my sense of hearing. Many people would say the thing they would miss most about losing their hearing is music. But I think I would miss a lot more than just the sound of music. Have you ever dropped something, like a quarter or a pencil, and you didn't know you dropped it except you heard it hit the ground? What happens to that pencil if you're deaf? Have you ever listened to the sound of your breathing or the sound of your eating? What about the sound your skin makes when you rub your hands together? All these things make unique sounds that I began to notice more after I started taking sign language. As hearing individuals, we should appreciate the wonders of our ears, no matter how minute the sensation may seem. All right, I get it. Who cares about the sound our skin makes or that pencil that got left behind? Well, let me give you an example you might find a little more substantial. Think about the way we communicate with each other. The hearing tend to be very dismissive, distracted by the world around us, avoiding eye contact, just holding on to the conversation with our ears. If you're deaf, this is not possible. If you aren't looking at the person you're signing with, there's no communication. Every second you look away, you're missing important aspects of your conversation. This makes communication more intimate, and deeper connections are made. You start to forget the distractions of life and just focus on that other individual. To the hearing, communication has become this thing that we hardly even think about anymore. We can communicate with almost everyone, but would rather not communicate with most of them. This is not the case if you're deaf. Not everyone can sign, and lip reading is really hard. Deaf people cherish communication because of this. Humans are social animals. We want to communicate and desire to be understood. I think we sometimes forget the beauty of interpersonal interaction. By the end of my course, my ears had become a wonder to me. I started to think about everything in relation to my hearing. I was excited about this newfound appreciation of my hearing and at the same time quite satisfied with the experience I had over the last 8 weeks. My teacher encouraged those who wanted to continue their study of sign to take another 8 weeks of the beginning course before moving up to the intermediate level. Next class started same time, same place next week. Leaving class that night, I really had no intentions of continuing my study of sign, but sure enough, I found myself back the next week for another 8-week beginning course of ASL. And this is when I really started to study the language. And by this, I don't mean memorizing vocabulary. Signing just started to make sense to me. On my very first ever sign language class, we learned that when you ask questions, your eyebrows need to be engaged. When you ask WH questions, you lower your eyebrows and lean forward a little bit. When you ask yes/no questions, you raise your eyebrows. The first time around the class, this gesture was very forced. I would forget to raise my eyebrows or lower my eyebrows when they were supposed to be raised. The second time around the class, this became much more natural. I realized this is normally what I do when I voice questions. Just as Chris Fulcher said earlier in the first session, he could understand what his doctor was saying, even though, or at least he could understand that his doctor was asking a question, even though he couldn't hear him. We all use these gestures, and we all understand these social cues. This allowed me to relax a little bit when learning sign language. I realized I wasn't so far out of my element. I became more comfortable with the language and was able to appreciate the nuances of it. ASL isn't just a language, it is art. And I mean this in 2 ways. First, ASL is the ultimate form of expression. It's language that entwines your body and your emotions. Our hands and our bodies create the words, while facial expressions and our posture create the inflection. Without emotions, sentences become flat. We speak in monotone. Well, it's the same with sign language. If you tell someone you're happy, you have to look happy. The hearing tend to be guarded, preserving our emotions for only our closest friends and family. Sign language forces you to be emotionally open and available, allowing to express our thoughts and feelings in one. While our feelings may be easy to express, the meaning of our thoughts still has to be conveyed clearly. This can become complicated in sign language. I couldn't find the exact statistic, but my teacher said something along the lines of, all the words in the English language, only about 1/10 of them are signs in ASL. Not only this, but there are many words that share signs or have signs that look very similar to theirs. My favorite example of this is the number 99 and the words French fries. In situations like this, everything depends on context. And that's the second reason that ASL is art. It has to be interpreted. Anyone could look at a famous piece of artwork such as Edvard Munch's painting popularly known as The Scream and say, this person just saw a spider, that's why they're screaming. Well, just because you come up with an interpretation doesn't mean you caught the artist's meaning. There are many ways that a single sentence can be signed, and multiple ways that a signed sentence can be translated into English. This can cause anxiety about whether your interpretation of a sentence is correct or if you're missing the point. My teacher said the best defense against this anxiety is to communicate with those who can both voice and sign at the same time. This is when the whole picture starts to come together. And the picture was coming together for me too. I had gained an appreciation of my hearing and was starting to appreciate the beauty of the language, but I still didn't understand what it was like to be deaf. This all changed for me the first night of my intermediate course. In terms of the community course I take, the intermediate level is as high as you can go. Once you start taking that class, you just take it forever until you know everything about sign language. Because of this, there's a varying level of ability among the students in my class. Class is taught exclusively in ASL, and we're encouraged not to use our voices at all. The first night, we started a normal introductory activity. Everyone was to go around, sign their names, and say something else I didn't quite catch the sign for. I was grateful I wasn't going first. I studied all the other students' signs, trying to figure out what I was supposed to say after my name, but could only pick up a couple things. Someone signed, I'm learning ASL. Someone said something about a baby. Someone said something about a nurse. And then it was my turn. I stood up, I signed, "My name is Pamela. I'm learning ASL." And I froze. Just kind of shrugged a little, speechless, because I wasn't supposed to voice. But everyone was staring at me, so finally I just said aloud, "I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing." Turns out I was supposed to be sharing a fun fact about myself. So I finished my introduction with much help from my teacher, of course, and sat back down confused because I had no idea what anyone was saying, and scared because I was beginning to realize this class was going to be really hard. I sat there silently, avoiding eye contact, holding back my tears, petrified of being asked another question. Finally, my teacher started to speak again to bring the first day to a close. She said, "It's okay if you're confused." She was proud of me for saying something. She told us that the way that I felt is the way that deaf people feel every single day walking out into the hearing world. They know they won't be able to understand most people. They will be confused and may be scared. For me, these feelings were time limited. I knew that class was going to end, and trust me, I was watching that clock slowly tick by. Deaf people, on the other hand, cannot escape the hearing world, because the hearing world is where they live. There's no deaf island, as my teacher likes to say. The hearing don't have to interact with the deaf, but the deaf are constantly surrounded by hearing people. We don't have to learn anything about deaf culture, and will not if we don't make an active effort to. The deaf, on the other hand, must learn from the hearing and must be part of hearing culture. This can cause resentment among the deaf towards the hearing. This and the fact that many hearing people see themselves as superior to the deaf, what is known as autism. Take, for example, what is often considered the politically correct way to address the deaf, hearing impaired. This is actually highly insulting and implies that the deaf are impaired and inferior because they can't hear. They could just as easily call us deaf impaired because we aren't deaf. Calling the deaf hearing impaired implies that they are handicapped and they need to be fixed. A deaf person would strongly disagree with this. There's actually an intense degree of deaf pride among the deaf community. Deaf people believe that deaf people should be in relationships with other deaf people. Babies born deaf are desirable and cherished in the deaf community. Deafness isn't seen as a disability, but a culture. Still, in hearing culture, the deaf are seen as handicapped, and that's why they tend to separate themselves as much as they can from the hearing. So we need to evaluate how the deaf are treated in our culture and how we personally treat the deaf. My teacher came up with an amazing example that I'd love to share with you. Think of all the NBA players you can name. Think about how much they're paid and how much airtime they receive on TV. Now think of the WNBA players you can name, their salaries, their TV time. Now what about professional basketball athletes that are deaf? Well, they're not even on the court. The deaf and hard of hearing are still looked down upon in our culture. They struggle to get jobs because the hearing don't understand how they'll interact with others in the office. The deaf and hard of hearing fight to join the military and combat those who tell them they won't be professional athletes or musicians or politicians. And I just want to note the reason there's not a picture of a deaf politician on this slide is because there's never been a deaf politician in the history of the US government. The deaf and hard of hearing should be able to follow their dreams just as the rest of us can, but the hearing's discrimination and lack of understanding of deaf culture gets in the way of this. So I challenge you with a couple of experiments that might help you understand just a little bit what it's like to be deaf. The first is easy, so I encourage all to try. Turn on your TV or get on your computer, find a program or a video that's greatly focused around one person talking or a couple people having a conversation, maybe a talk show or a news program or a TED Talk. You want to find something where the camera is continuously pointed at someone's face so you have a constant view of their mouth. Now mute your TV or computer. Try to figure out what these people are saying just by reading their lips. My teacher, who has been deaf for over 20 years, says she only picks up about 30% of what people are saying when she reads lips. The second experiment is for those who are a little more adventurous. Go out and buy some earplugs, but get the silicone kind because they cancel out the most noise. Put those in and wear them around for a couple of hours, or if you're brave, a whole day. These experiments will not show you what it's like to be deaf, but might give you the smallest inkling of what it's like to live in the hearing world. I want everyone to change their views about the deaf and hard of hearing as I changed my views. The deaf don't need to be avoided, and we don't need to feel sorry for them. Deafness shouldn't be viewed as impairment, but rather a difference, a culture. We should include the deaf and make them feel welcome. We should treat them as we would any other person. Take some responsibility when communicating with the deaf. Don't force them to convey to you what they want and need. Help them arrive at this point. I urge all of you to try and understand deaf culture and learn a little bit of sign language, even if it's as simple as hi, please, thank you, sorry. It's okay to pantomime, make up signs when communicating with the deaf. It won't be proper ASL, but if both parties are understood, that's communication, which is better than letting the deaf fall into the background of hearing culture. Every week when I go to class, I'm still scared and confused. But these aren't feelings we should shy away from. We should embrace them and try to understand them. It's okay to step out of your comfort box sometimes. Learning sign language has much more meaning than simply the knowledge of another language. If there's one sign that has impacted me more than any other sign in ASL, it is this. This is the sign for hearing, but this is also the sign for public. The meaning of the signs is much deeper than the definitions of the words. The deaf do not view themselves as part of the hearing public. This is not their fault, it is ours. I want to welcome the deaf to feel comfortable in the world we live in. I hope that we can make the deaf feel they are part of the public. Thank you.